For those who don't know me, just to say I'm also a speech and language therapist. I know there are many of us now. And in the 1990s, I was confronted with families who had children with autism, which I at the time didn't know much about. So I went to study in the States and in England, and I learned all about ABA therapy, which is applied behavior analysis. And a lot of my therapy in speech and language therapy now is based also on ABA. So the subject we're going to talk about tonight is behavior management. This is particularly directed towards children with autism, but having said that, it's what I'm going to talk about is applicable to all children with any other developmental difficulties, any other speech and language or behavior issues, and also to typically developing children. I've learned over the years that the principles we use with the children with autism are also applicable to any other child, and I've tested it and found out that it works well. So I'm often called in to deal with children who don't have any other developmental difficulties, but they just have behavior issues. So I hope that this can help you with any child you may come across, or even with your own children. So the first thing we want to know, I'm going to go pretty quickly because the time is short, but what do we mean when we talk about an unacceptable behavior? So it's a behavior that can lead to injuries to the child himself or to another person, or to any material damages, a behavior which is socially stigmatizing and that interferes in relationships with others. So it affects the child's relationship with other children or with other adults. A behavior that masks the skills that are already acquired and prevents new skills from being assimilated. Usually when we see a behavior problem, there are often something from all of those points involved. So the first thing we want to do when we look at a child who has behavior is to see that we have established certain things before we try to make what we call a functional analysis of behavior. The functional analysis of the behavior is to understand, why is he doing it? What's the child trying to achieve by behaving in this inappropriate way? And then how can we replace that behavior with a good behavior, with an appropriate behavior? So the first thing we want to check is that in the child's life, whether he's at school, at home, or anywhere, he has efficient reinforcement systems. What we mean by that is that the child is motivated to do whatever you're asking him to do, or to be in the situation that he's has to be in. For the child with autism, it's often useful if they have visual reminders. Also, a lot of the children that we meet don't speak. So if they don't speak, we want to make sure that he has another system, a functional communication system. Or some of the children with autism or other speech issues do talk, but their speech is often not functional because it's either not understood, or it's not developed well enough for it to be functional. Or we have children with autism who actually talk, but that their speech doesn't mean anything. So also we want to make sure that the activities we do with the children are meaningful, and that we're using appropriate materials within the appropriate environment. And if we have a gap in one of these areas, it's possible that behavioral disorders will come back. But if all of these elements are established, inappropriate behavior persists, we need to intervene. And what we do is we deal with the behavior by analyzing the function. So we're going to develop what we call a functional behavioral analysis. So what we want to look at first is the type of behavior as opposed to the function. So the type of behavior refers to the appearance of the behavior. We call that the topography in ABA terminology. So what does it look like? What is the frequency? How long does it last? What's the intensity? And the function refers to the reason. Why? What's a child trying to obtain? There is always a reason for inappropriate behavior. And our function is to find out why the child is doing it. What's he trying to obtain? So then we can know how to teach the child to obtain whatever he wants in another way, in an appropriate way. So this, how we find out the function is determined by what we call the functional behavioral analysis. So there are basically four main reasons that a child behaves inappropriately. The first one is to seek to obtain an object, an activity, or our attention. Often it's attention seeking. The second one is to avoid or escape the task. The third one is autostimulation. So children with autism often tend to engage in behaviors where they're stimulating themselves, like flapping their hands or looking at lights or balancing. Balancing is French, but rocking backwards and forwards. These three reasons come from the child himself, but there's a fourth reason that is often provoked by the environment. So the first reason could be he loses a reinforcer, or that there's a delay in the reinforcer coming to him. So for example, the child's playing with his favorite toy and I come along and take it off him and say, okay, you've got to stop doing that now because we have to change activities. And that can provoke a behavior problem for the child, or a delay in a reinforcer. So for example, the child wants to go on the computer, but there's another child using it and he has to wait. So that can provoke a behavior issue. And in fact, this is something that can provoke a behavior issue in any of us. Imagine the situation where you come home from work one day and you go to the supermarket because you've forgotten one ingredient for the recipe you want to make that evening, and you're stuck behind a line of people with trolleys full of groceries. So we can feel the anxiety increasing, and we're not very happy having to wait in the line. And sometimes people actually have a behavior that's provoked by the fact of having to wait. Many children will have behavior issues when they're told no, many adults as well. So that's one of the behaviors that is pretty natural. I always tell parents not to worry if he has a meltdown when he's told no. And sometimes it can be provoked by the schedule, something he doesn't like on his schedule, or it can be provoked by pain. The child's in pain. That's more difficult for us to find out for some of the children. So they're the basic four reasons. There are others as well. It's not exhaustive, but they're the basic reasons why a child will behave inappropriately. So our job is to find out why he's in that particular time, he's behaving inappropriately, what's he trying to obtain, and to give him another way of behaving. And sometimes it's not only one reason, it can be two or three different reasons for the same behavior. So the first thing we want to do is to define the behavior. What's he doing exactly? And the definition has to be what we call specific, observable, and measurable. So the reason we say this is that we have to be able to describe exactly what we saw, and so that everybody can recognize the behavior when it happens, the same behavior. So an example of this would be the child hits his brother on the arm 5 times. A non-example, so something that is not a specific observable and measurable definition, would be he's anxious, he's tired, he's not feeling well, he didn't sleep well. They're sort of things that we suppose, suppositions, but they're not exactly what we saw. So we need to also, an easy point number 2 is identify when and why the behavior is inappropriate. because we know that certain behaviors are appropriate in certain situations and not in others. So then we collect and organize information from our observations. We take data and we interview other professionals and the parents to find out more information about the child. This is then that we establish a functional evaluation, and we're going to fill in what we call an ABC sheet. ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So we want to fill in the details of what happened just before the behavior. Behavior, we're going to put in our specific, accurate description of the behavior, and the consequence, what happened afterwards. Because what we know is that the consequence to a behavior will either encourage the behavior or discourage it. So, and that's a basic fact of life, because, by the way, ABA is not something that was designed for or invented for children with developmental difficulties or autism. It's in fact a way of life. We're all under the influence of ABA. So to give an example of this ABC sheet that we'll be filling in, the antecedents, we're going to talk about where, when, with whom, how, what was the environment. So for example, what happened? The child sees his favorite toy on a shelf. What was the behavior? He screams. What was the consequence? And we know that the consequence is the factor that increases or maintains the behavior or decreases it. The adult gives him a toy, gives him the toy. So in this particular case, this is a situation that I come across very frequently with young children who don't know how to communicate yet. So the child screams for the toy and mum gives him the toy. So what does the child learn? He learns that if I need a toy, I need to scream. So if I want a toy, I need to scream. So what we want to do is to, and we know from this example that the function was to obtain a reward. He wanted his toy and he screamed and got the toy. So how we intervene here is we come here and we say, okay, the child can have the toy, but we need to teach him an appropriate way of asking for it. So for example, if the child can talk, we're going to teach him to say, please can I have my toy, or please can I have the train? If he can only say one word, we'll teach him to say train, or choo-choo, or whatever he can say to indicate train. And if the child can't talk, well, obviously we're going to have to come in and introduce an alternative communication system, at least until he learns how to talk, or if he never learns how to talk, at least he has an alternative communication system. So the next point is we want to identify the function of the behavior. And in order to get a functional hypothesis, we need to analyze many situations. So sometimes we may spend 2-3 weeks or a month filling in ABC sheets until we arrive at a functional hypothesis. And as long as there's no reliable hypothesis, analysis, or data collection, we need to continue observing. And then once we know why the child is doing this behavior, for example, it may be the child sits down to do his work and all of a sudden he throws everything on the floor. And so by the time we pick up everything that he's thrown on the floor, he's already managed to have a little break. So that we can maybe say after much data taking, we can maybe say, oh, well, that child behaved in that way, so he could have a break, so he could get out of doing his work. So if we come to that conclusion, well, the appropriate behavior that we want to teach him is to ask for a break, or to say, I don't want to do this work, or can I do something else, instead of throwing all the material on the floor. So we're going to develop and write a strategy on how to reduce this problematic behavior. And I'll go more into that detail of number 6 in a moment. And then we implement the strategy through our interventions. So here's an example. The child, what's the definition of the behavior? The child screams and hits his head. We know it's inappropriate behavior because it's not socially appropriate, and also it's dangerous for the child. So we want to organize our data collection. We print out ABA sheets. A clipboard is a very efficient way of taking data. And we're going to fill in the sheets. So if we come to the functional hypothesis after taking data that the behavior is aimed at obtaining a reward, we're going to write down our different strategies for this behavior reduction, which I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail in a minute. So we're going to use extinction, teach alternative behavior, and use what we call differential reinforcement. So extinction means, it's a term used in ABA terminology, that means we're going to not give the child what he wanted on doing that by performing that way. So for example, if the child screams to get something he wants, we don't give him what he wants. If the child screams to get out of doing the work, he doesn't get out of doing the work. If the child screams because he has to wait, well, he still has to wait. But at the same time, we use what we call extinction after the behavior in order to discourage that behavior and reduce it. But at the same time, in parallel, we make sure that we're teaching the child an alternative behavior. Okay, you're not getting a break when you scream, but it's my role to teach you how to ask for a break. You're not getting the cookie when you hit me to get it, but it's my role to teach you how to ask for the cookie. So it's very important to work on the two things at the same time. And then we use what we call differential reinforcement. Differential reinforcement means reinforcing the good behavior and not reinforcing the poor behavior. And often what we tend to do with all of our children, even typically developing children, is that when they engage in inappropriate behaviors, we tend to say, oh, that's not right, and why are you behaving like that, and you're not to do this. But when the child engages in the appropriate behavior, or when he's simply just sitting quietly and not engaging in the inappropriate behavior he usually does, we tend to ignore him, and that's a mistake. What we need to do is to notice and reinforce when the behavior is actually good. So I'll go a little bit more into detail concerning those terms in a minute. And we want to teach the child to request what he wants, the alternative behavior, and not to give him what he wants if he screams or hits his head. That's what we call extinction. So to look at this step 6 in detail, we want to elaborate. Once we have the function, we know why the child's doing it, we want to elaborate and write down a strategy to reduce the problematic behavior. So what is included in this behavioral intervention plan? We want, number one, an operational definition of the target behavior. What does it look like? What does he do exactly? Does he spit? Does he scratch? Does he scream? Does he lie on the floor and kick his legs and scream at the same time? Does he take the chair and throw it at the wall? And believe me, I've seen all of those. So what exactly happens? A description of the function of the behavior. Why is he doing it? Is he doing it to obtain our attention? Is he doing it to obtain a reinforcer? Is he doing it because he's stimulating himself for sensorial stimulation? Is he doing it because he wants out? He doesn't want to do what we were asking him to do? Or was it maybe provoked by something? Was it provoked by us saying no? Was it provoked by him having to wait? Was it provoked by us offering him an activity that he doesn't like or doesn't feel like doing at that moment? Was it provoked by the fact that he's maybe in pain? So all those, at that moment, we need to identify the function of this particular behavior. And once again, there can be more than one function. There can be maybe 2 or 3 functions. So we want to do what we call modifications regarding antecedent conditions. So that means that If the child is behaving inappropriately to obtain something he wants, but he doesn't know how to ask for it, well, in the antecedent before the behavior, I'm going to teach the child how to ask for it. So that's an example of modifying the antecedent conditions. If the child just is totally communicative, but just has behavior issues, maybe during the antecedent conditions, I'll be going to remember to reward the good behavior. Maybe I'd been ignoring it when he'd been good and not giving him any rewards for being good. So it's important to reward the good behavior. And we want to provide an alternative behavior definition. Okay, I don't like this behavior. It's socially inappropriate. What am I going to teach the child as an alternative behavior? Then we're going to talk about reinforcement procedure description. I don't really have time to go too much into that. I hope maybe I'll be able to do that in a future talk. It's just that when we talk about the differential reinforcement and reinforcing the appropriate behavior, we do have different programs for that, but it's too long and complicated to go into in this talk tonight. And the other thing we want to do is decide how are we going to behave when the target behavior occurs. So in fact, when we're working as a team, which most of the time we are, we want to make sure that everybody responds in the same way to the inappropriate behavior. Because if 9 out of 10 of the team are doing extinction, so they're not responding to the inappropriate behavior, and one person comes along and responds to that inappropriate behavior, then that's enough to start it off again. And we want to have a data collection system and references that we all understand, so that we know if the reason we take data is to know, first of all, what's going on with the behavior, but second of all, we want to take data to see if the strategies that we have implemented are working. So we take data on how often the inappropriate behavior is occurring and if it's reducing or not. If I see after a week or two it's not reducing, then obviously I need to change my strategy because there's something not right with the way I'm treating the issue. So here is once again our ABC sheet. So the antecedent is where, when, with whom, how, what happened. The behavior is exactly what you saw. It has to be specific, observable, and measurable. You have to be able to imagine it and to see it from the description. And the consequence, what happened? What did the people around do? And it's very important that even if you think you've done the wrong thing, which we all do, to note down what you actually did following the behavior, because then we can see why the behavior is increasing, or if it is appropriate, decreasing. And then we want to know, what is the function of the behavior? Was it to obtain a reward? Was it to escape or avoid the situation or the task? Was it provoked? Or sometimes there was no obvious reason? And I come across that. So if there's no obvious reason, I have to keep going on to try and find out why the child is behaving in that way. So we need to teach the child how to behave, how to get what he wants or to avoid a situation. So we're going to use what we call extinction again. So I'll be removing, as I explained earlier, the natural reinforcement following the behavior. If the child is behaving in that way to obtain my attention, he won't get my attention. If he is behaving that way to escape the situation, he won't escape. I have to teach him an alternative behavior very quickly. So set up a functional communication system. And I often come across this situation with very young children who come to me with communication difficulties. So they're only 2 or 2.5, and they're screaming and crying because they don't know how to express themselves. So I feel this urgency to teach them how to express themselves. So often if the child doesn't talk, we can't force the child to talk, especially if he doesn't have the ability to imitate speech. Or so in the meantime, while I'm teaching the child how to speak, in parallel, I need to put into place an alternative communication system, whether it's sign language or picture exchange or another system on the iPad or something to teach him how to communicate. Otherwise, I can't tell the parents not to respond when he's screaming, but only to respond when he communicates appropriately. When in that case, we have to have an appropriate communication system. So that's one of the urgent things to be put into place. And in the meantime, before the child learns how to communicate appropriately, I do tell the parents to try and give him what he wants or to let him go out before he starts screaming or hitting or behaving inappropriately. So that's one of the important points of this presentation, that every person in the world has to have an appropriate communication system. And most of the young children that I see, 2-3-year-olds, all come in with inappropriate behavior. It's rare to see a child who cannot communicate, who is not behaving inappropriately. So the other thing is the differential reinforcement that we put into place. So we congratulate the child or give him more rewards when the behavior is appropriate. Very important, as I said, not to ignore that behavior. Because if it's ignored and the child's given attention when he's screaming or hitting, if it's attention seeking, well, he'll be more inclined to scream and to hit and to kick than if it's ignored. So extinction involves removing the natural reinforcement following the behavior. So again, if the behavior is to obtain a reward, well, the object becomes inaccessible. If it's attention seeking, the child is ignored. If it's to escape or avoid the situation, well, the child has to stay on task. And if it's auto-stimulation, we block access to the auto-stimulation. Then we want to, of course, teach the appropriate behavior, which has the same function as the problematic behavior. So in other words, the child gets what he's asking for, but he goes by a different route. Instead of behaving inappropriately, he communicates appropriately. So if the child is, the reason for the inappropriate behavior is to obtain a reward, we're going to teach him how to ask for the reward using his communication system. Another reason why he has to have an alternative or augmentative communication system. If it's a set attention seeking, I'm going to teach the child how to ask for attention. Once again, ask for a hug, ask for it to be for someone to play with him, or to hold his hand, or to watch something on TV with him, and using his communication system. If it's to escape or to avoid the activity, I'm going to teach him how to ask for a break, or how to ask for to do something else. And even if the child can't talk, we've got to have systems where we can teach him how to ask for a break or to ask for something else. If he's auto-stimulating, so that means that he's engaging in an activity that's inappropriate socially. So he's sort of rocking backwards and forwards, or he's humming in a very loud way, or he's turning round and round and round. What we want to do is to teach a functional activity that provides the same sensation, because often the child, especially the children with autism, auto-stimulate because it gives them a certain self-stimulation that they need. They need to feel that auditory stimulation, or the visual stimulation, or audio perceptive stimulation. So for example, if the child's round and round and round, I might put him on a merry-go-round, something where it's appropriate to turn round and round, or on a roundabout, meaning one of those games that we often see in parks. If he's rocking, I might put him on a rocking chair. So if it's provoked, for example, provoked by waiting, I'm going to teach the concept of wait. If it's provoked by me saying no, well, I'm going to offer alternative solutions on how to understand no and how to accept no. So you can help a child to accept no by offering an alternative. Or if it's something he wants to eat and there's nothing left, showing him there's an empty packet. Or you can put in, if the child has a schedule board, you can put the item that he wants on the schedule board and show him that he'll have it later on, not now. Or we use what we call token economy systems, where the child earns tokens for good behavior. So maybe I'll put it on a token economy system and say, okay, it's no, you can't have it now, but you can have it later if you do this, this, and this. So it's not that we don't say no to the child, we do, but we try to give him other, we use strategies to help him accept the no, in inverted commas. So we also use differential reinforcement, which means that we reinforce good behavior, and we reinforce even more when the child not only behaves well, but does something else that's great that we weren't expecting. It also means that we're going to reinforce the behavior when the child is not doing it. We use differential reinforcement for when the child is not engaging in the inappropriate behavior. And that's when we come to use all the different differential reinforcement programs that I mentioned before that I would like to talk about in a further presentation. So get used to reinforcing good behavior. There was a study that was done in the States years ago that showed that a teacher was told only one thing in a classroom of where the children had behavior issues, and she was told to do only one thing. The one thing that she was told to do was to just reinforce the child when he wasn't behaving badly, when he wasn't engaging in the inappropriate behavior. And we saw on the graph of the result of that study how within a month, the inappropriate behaviors went down remarkably within that class. When all she was doing, she wasn't teaching them an alternative behavior. All she was doing was reinforcing the child, giving him lots of praise, giving him maybe things that he likes when he wasn't engaging in the inappropriate behavior. And that's a strategy that I often use when I'm teaching staff, is to tell them when the child has behavior, the first thing we need to do is to reinforce when he's not doing it. And then to use, obviously in parallel, other strategies to reduce and eliminate the inappropriate behavior. So this differential reinforcement consists of reinforcing appropriate behavior and also applying extinction for inappropriate behavior. So differential reinforcement is used in parallel to extinction, and it's a procedure that helps reduce inappropriate behavior and encourage desired behavior. So it is extremely important to systematically reinforce the child when he behaves appropriately. And once again, we use these differential reinforcement programs. So we also want to work on the antecedent strategy. So in our ABC, remember, we had the antecedent, what happens before, and ourselves as professionals and parents, in fact, we want to do certain things before the behavior occurs to try and avoid the poor behavior. So if the antecedent strategies will change according to the function of the behavior. So if we find that the child is behaving inappropriately in order to obtain a reward or to obtain attention, we're going to give him more rewards and attention when he's not doing it before the behavior occurs. And also we often use a visual menu of rewards. So we might have pictures of different things the child likes that we're going to offer to him to show him that that's what he gets when his behavior is good. If it's to avoid or escape the situation, well, I may ask myself, why does this child want to avoid this activity? Why does he not want to do the work that I've given to him? Maybe it's too difficult. Maybe it's too boring. So maybe he wants to have choices. Sometimes one of the things we would do would be to give the child a choice, because often they feel like they've got some sort of hold on the situation when they can choose. I'm certainly going to modify the complexity of the task to see if he behaves, if he does not seek to avoid the situation, if the task is easier. And I'll modify his schedule to propose activities that make fewer demands, and mix favorite and not favorite tasks. So if we're doing an activity of maths, which he's not too keen on, well, I might follow that with an activity of drawing or coloring that he likes, just an example of that. If the behavior is provoked, for example, one of the things I mentioned earlier was a child might have a meltdown because he has to stop an activity he likes doing. I might take off the toy he's playing with to say to him, okay, you've got to stop doing this because we're going to another activity. So what I would do is, instead of taking away the activity he loves, or for example, he's playing with his Lego and it's free play, but now it's time to go to the gym, instead of just saying, okay, now we're taking away that we have to stop the Lego, I'm going to show him something that's reinforcing for him within the next activity. So it may be, oh, you can come and play with the big ball in the gym. And I show him, it's called the reinforcer first strategy. So I'm going to show him a reinforcer from the next activity before I take away the one that he's actually playing with. I often use this strategy when the child has to leave the clinic because he's having a great time and doesn't often want to leave. So I'll always ask the parent to have something in their handbag that they can show him that he'll get once he puts the toys away and makes his way towards the exit. I also want to teach him how to accept change, that things change, so that sometimes we have a bad surprise, and so a behavior can be provoked because we're all going to go out on an outing today to the zoo. Everybody brought their packed lunches. We've been preparing this for ages and talking about zoo and all the different animals, and then unfortunately the bus broke down and we can't go to the zoo today. So I'll teach the child within my antecedent strategies how to tolerate disappointments like that. Sometimes I need to teach the child the real world and to say, okay, it's like that, that's the way it is. So we have to wait till he's at a certain level before we start teaching that, but we do teach the child to we try and avoid the protected environment so that he's ready to face real world situations later on in life. So basically what we do is, when you look at this ABC, in order to decrease the behavior or eliminate the behavior, we're going to work on antecedent strategies. So teach appropriate behaviors in advance, use differential reinforcement to reinforce the good behavior or reinforce the child when he's not behaving inappropriately. And then the consequence is if the child it's too late, he's already engaged in the inappropriate behavior, is to use extinction and remove the natural reinforcement for the behavior. So we're not going to give him whatever he was trying to get by using that behavior. And by working on the antecedent conditions and the consequences, that's how these two things decrease the behavioral appearance, frequency, and intensity. So I know it was quite a quick way of trying to get through all that, but I hope that it was useful and interesting, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm going to stop the recording right now. We've got about, stop recording.